I'm absolutely late to the party, but happy to be invited, as this year I have spent, since Earl Crush came out earlier this year, binging through Alexandra Vasti's work in preparation partly for Ladies in Hating, which came out earlier this week. And I have absolutely loved what I've read so far, whether it be the entirety of the Belvoir's Library series or the novellas she has had out. I think I still have one to read, and luckily we already have an announcement for a 2026 book. But I think Ladies in Hating, the finale to the Belvoir's Library series, I think has been the book, or one of the most hotly anticipated historical romances of the year, at least in my anecdotal observation, in that I feel like I've seen a lot of people, even outside of historical romance communities, hyping this book, and for good reason. Ladies in Hating is a sapphic historical romance with a gothic twist following Georgiana, who we have gotten to know in both Ne'er-do-Well and Earl Crush, and it is finally her time to find the happily ever after that she was dodging so determinedly in the first book. Now, I did swing back to Ne'er-do-Well prior to reading Ladies in Hating because I did start smack dab in the middle with Earl Crush, and Earl Crush still holds a very, very special place in my heart. However, I have loved every book in this series, and while you can absolutely read Ladies in Hating on its own, I do think that I gained something from having read Ne'er-do-Well, especially first, because I got to watch more of the arc that Georgiana in particular goes through over the course of this series. Now, I think that Vasti does an excellent job at establishing that emotional work for Georgiana independently in this book, so I think you are absolutely golden if you want to go into this first, especially as, again, all of the necessary backstory is kind of given to you. There are just some little nods and winks for those who have read the whole series, as well as potentially some seeds, hopefully, some seeds being planted for the future. But before I get too ahead of myself and dive all the way in, hi, my name is Melody. We talk about books and book adjacent things on this channel. Ideally, every Friday, we are digging deeper into a specific title, and today that book is Ladies in Hating. And if any of that sounds good to you, go ahead and like and subscribe and hang out a little longer. Now, we've known since book one that Georgiana is writing Gothic novels under a pen name, as that is a pretty significant plot point at the climax of that book. And it comes very much into play here in the sense that we are catching back up with Georgiana and her mother as they are living alone. They have really cut themselves off, or it should be noted that Georgiana in particular has really cut herself off from the rest of her family. Now, her father, who caused a lot of this mess, is no longer in the picture. He has since passed. But even past that, due to the scandal related to her revealing herself as this Gothic novelist, Georgiana has really cut herself off. And also, because of that scandal, she is reliant on her income as a Gothic novelist to support her and her mother. That is partly why she is so aggrieved at the beginning of the book, as she believes that there is another Gothic novelist who may be plagiarizing her. In addition to being well established in the plot, this was also excellently established in a series of promo threads that got me in the first half. I'm not gonna lie. So we are following Georgiana as she is trying to uncover and get to the bottom of who this other author is and how this author is getting a hold of twists, whether it be reveals at the climax, character names, just little things in the plot or mirrors of themes in these books when Georgiana has been keeping her novels so closely to her chest. She does not share them with anyone, so she's not sure how this keeps happening. And so she's trying to expedite her writing process to basically publish first so it doesn't look like she's copying anyone. And she is also trying to uncover this author through her connections with Belvoir's Library, which is of course run by the heroine of the first book, Selena. However, Selena is keeping this identity close to her chest because she says to Georgiana, well, you wouldn't want me to reveal you to someone else. And so there is a layer of morality there that is keeping her from this reveal. However, Georgiana has other ideas, including enlisting the help of her friend Iris to host a stakeout essentially outside Belvoir's to try and get sight on this other author, which she does, only to find out that this is in fact not a mysterious stranger, but someone that Georgiana knows very well because they grew up together. And not only that, but was in fact her first crush, and that of course is Katrina, or Kat as we come to know her over the course of the book, who is also a Gothic novelist writing under a pseudonym and dependent on that income to support her family, because it is revealed that her family was rather suddenly and mysteriously thrown out of the employ of Georgiana's family after Georgiana's father kicks them out, because Kat's father was Georgiana's father's butler. And Kat, who is also working at a pie shop and keeping up with her writing and trying to support her family, including a younger brother who she is getting an apprenticeship with a solicitor, she is not super thrilled with the accusation that all of her hard work is stolen. And I actually really liked the kind of interior work in this moment, because Kat is like, oh, you don't think someone of the lower classes can come up with this? Which I additionally took as an indirect hit at the Shakespeare naysayers. But class absolutely comes into play in this novel, especially obviously between Georgiana and Kat and how they exist in the world and their expectations. And so there is a level of offense to that Georgiana presumes that Kat has stolen all of this. Meanwhile, there are a lot of coincidences between the two works, and Georgiana is just as reliant on this and has no reason prior to the revelation that it's Kat not to think that there might be something suspicious going on. And so after this reveal, which happens very early on, probably obviously from a plotting standpoint, they kind of dance around each other for a little bit and try to avoid using similar themes. Like Georgiana stumbles across Kat in a cemetery and is basically like, okay, this is yours, I'll back off. And then they both find themselves in the same recently opened Gothic mansion, abandoned Gothic mansion, complete with mysterious housekeeper. And they come to a kind of tentative truce in that they will both kind of write their own separate things, they won't have overlap in their stories, and they've kind of divvied up the house based on times of day as well. But this of course puts them in much closer proximity to one another in a way where they can't really avoid each other, and things become more complicated, especially as at the end of their stay, which is abruptly shortened, they are faced with being locked inside the Gothic manor. And suddenly, in addition to all the repressed emotion, there's a little bit of a murder plot sprinkled on top of everything. But like with Vasti's other work, this really explores this deep-seated want between or from our characters, this emphasis on family and community, and this wonderful humor that puts her in a direct line with authors such as Tessa Dare, which is great for all of us who have been waiting for the new Tessa Dare for over half a decade at this point. And I really like the dynamic that we have between Georgiana and Kat here, that both of them have really high stakes for their careers, as well as the fulfillment they find in their careers. And there's also this sense of duty and responsibility to their families and the way the families play off of each other, as Georgiana really is seeking that family and sad to have let hers go and had to have cut them off for fear of causing them further harm. And Kat, who is so protective of her own family, and Georgiana getting a peek at that, and also the layers of love and desire between the two of them as they try and reconcile asking for what they want and balancing the emotional vulnerability of that with their pasts as well as with their future. And I think the Gothic is such a stellar setting for this. Now, this is not a Gothic novel, rather it kind of invokes elements of the Gothic kind of in an almost Northanger Abbey kind of way, especially as there is that humor. And of course the fact that they are Gothic novelists, but the setting of the house is invoking this idea of the Gothic and playing with it in a kind of nudge, nudge, wink, wink way that's really about the forced proximity of it. However, when we think about the idea of Gothics and what they represent, this idea of this repressed desire especially, I think is so genius in conversation here, because it's not beating us over the head with it, but it is so clearly there, and it works from multiple levels, because we have the kind of first layer of just the relationship this sapphic lesbian relationship between Kat and Georgiana being an emotional risk, and the idea of getting to the point and the place where you can name the thing you want, and all of the unnamed want that leads up to that moment, especially when we talk, or when the book kind of explores the idea of especially Georgiana's crush, and also Kat's awareness of her when they were young girls as well. But Georgiana's crush would be, I would argue, the more present historical crush. I will say I think there were opportunities to play with that a little more and let it land a little harder, especially in tandem with the kind of more personal, internal emotional journeys of these characters, especially Georgiana, who is living kind of in wake of a lot of abuse at the hands of her father, and is kind of reckoning her ability to see her self-worth and to ask for what she wants emotionally out of that, which is also kind of playing into this idea of the Gothic. And so getting to her recognizing that she can take the emotional risk with Kat, in the sense that she doesn't have to back off in order to protect those that she loves, that she doesn't by herself bring ruination and destruction. Again, some parallelism with that idea of the Gothic and the imagery that we're playing with there. In a lot of ways, Georgiana's emotional interior really mirrors that kind of Gothic setting, and I think that we played with that absolutely. There were a couple of emotional beats that felt very similar in that, and I think there was an opportunity. It felt like we pulled the punch just a little bit. I want to be clear, I do think that this succeeded on every level, but I think there was also an opportunity to push it just even a little further. It felt like the emotional kind of resolution at the end was rushed a little bit, where we didn't get to sit in the fullness of that emotional revelation, especially for Georgiana, as she has kind of the most drastic arc in terms of that in relation to that discovery for herself. And Kat still has a strong arc as well, but it's more in relation to what she might end up having to sacrifice for her family. And I think in that emotional vulnerability, it explores a lot of similarities thematically with Ne'er-do-Well and Earl Crush. With Ne'er-do-Well going back to this idea of feeling like you are not going to be serving the best interest of the person that you love, or that you will be actively causing harm to their life or their future by being in a relationship with them. And with Earl Crush, this idea of being afraid to want. And I think that the tenors are very different between Earl Crush and this book, because again, Georgiana has dealt with abuse from her father in her past that has kind of conditioned her to sacrifice for others, and she's become hyper independent in the process. And I think that that was some of the best character work, especially between Georgiana and Kat, in relation to Kat slowly being able to pick away those layers, and what first appeared as haughty from Georgiana, she was able to kind of recontextualize over the course of the book, especially as they grew closer, and recognize that as a fear response. And so you've got this wonderful kind of manifestation of the interior life through this exploration of the Gothic, where the ghosts are trauma all along, with lines like, "She'd hidden in the shadows and let her father ruin those she loved." But we also have, like I said, this really interesting exploration of the public versus private, especially when we are considering the pen names of both of our characters and how they present to the outside world differently through that, or how they are with their family differently, and then the personal relationship between the two of them, and especially for these two characters who are in a sapphic relationship in this particular time and place, how so much of that is going to be in these very small, intimate, private moments that aren't going to be celebrated necessarily in the larger world. And there is a quote that I particularly love in relation to this: "That was the way of histories, particularly intimate ones. Always they were partial, fragmented, the narrative filled in at the edges." And kind of juxtaposing this against the idea of the Gothic and this haunted house, or the air of whatever, with that, and the secrets that may lurk in the shadows and what those are. And there are just a lot of parallels there without it being, again, an explicitly gothic novel. We are just playing with that imagery and those themes in a kind of more rom-com-y setting. And then we have the introduction of those comedic moments at the same time to really help balance it out and kind of undercut the angst that is also there, particularly in this book, in the dog, Sir Francis Bacon, which did make me chuckle because my brother did have a 4-H pig back in the day named Sir Francis Bacon. That was a much different situation, obviously. And so we're watching the dog kind of barking at the wall or getting trapped where there are bats, and then Georgiana has to go in after him, and this and that cause little mishaps over the course of things that also help push these two women closer together. It's no zebra stampede, but it will do. And so it was just a joy watching these two come together, even if the end felt a little rushed at times. There were a lot of plot points that needed kind of wrapping up or tied together, especially in relation to the kind of crux of the book, in the kind of mysterious plot parallels, which was explained, but it felt a little bit like a throwaway. It didn't feel like we really sat in the beat of it. We get a reconciliation with Georgiana and her family that we didn't fully get to sit in, as well as Georgiana and Kat. I liked the way the epilogue was handled especially, but I would have liked to sit in the emotional resonance of these two kind of coming together and choosing each other explicitly just a hairbreadth more, because it was something that both of them did have to very consciously choose. That being said, I really enjoyed the friends and family they had around them in that choice, and this was just a very satisfying conclusion to a really stellar debut series. I loved every book in this series, and this was just such a strong conclusion. I was a little sad we didn't get any references to Lydia and Arthur, kind of, unless I missed them, even offhand, especially as Georgiana was present in that book. And there was what I hope is a seed being planted for later with Iris, who we get to know in book 1 as well, and is present as the kind of point friend for Georgiana in this book. And I really liked the way she needles Georgiana, her kind of dry wit and humor and sarcasm in relation especially to when Georgiana is going on and on and on about Lady Darling, and Iris is like, oh, you have never mentioned this before. And so I want her to have more time, especially because she had a very noticeable reaction to Selena mentioning that her brother Will was going to be back in town. And so I want that book. It doesn't look like it's the next book, but I very much would like that book. It has been dangled for a reason. So all in all, again, stellar series. If you are looking to get into historical romance, I think that this would be a great entry point, this series in particular. You can start with this book, absolutely, but I think that reading the entire series will give you a really satisfying arc, especially for Georgiana. And if you were a long-standing historical romance reader, I am sure this is already on your radar, but especially if you like authors such as Tessa Dare or even like Eloisa James, I think that this would be very much up your alley. It is trending, or kind of playing into the trend I've noticed in historical romance right now, where it feels like we are leaning, and again, not across the board, not absolutes, but there are a lot more kind of rom-com instincts that I'm noticing, again, as the rom-coms period are a little trendier right now. And I think that this honors all of those instincts and blends it together in a really, really successful way that's going to be satisfying, again, for long-standing historical romance readers, because it's in the tradition of authors that we already have familiarity with, and then also I think will potentially bridge the gap for new readers in that way as well, in a very exciting way. I don't know, but this was a really satisfying sapphic romance that hit the spot, especially after finishing The Buccaneers Season 2, and I was in the mood for something in the vein of Mabel and Honoria. And honestly, does this really mirror Mabel and Honoria? No. But it is delightful, it's warm, it is emotionally raw, it has a sprinkle of the gothic, a cute dog, and again, also explorations of class in romantic relationships in historical romance to get you ready for Bridgerton Season 4. So how can you say no? If you've read this one, I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you as always for hanging out and listening to mine. And there are many, many more historical romances from this year that I need to catch up on. But like and subscribe if you feel like it. read something good, and yeah, bye.